I'm just kidding. So, a couple ground rules before I get into the introductions. How many fans of the show Mr. Robot are in attendance today? Show of hands. How many of you have seen all of season 1? How many of you have seen all of season 2? Uh-oh. So, I'm going to be honest with you. Major spoiler alert for those of you that are not caught up. And honestly, we've given you enough time. Season 2 wrapped up a few weeks ago. You should be well caught up. In all seriousness, no. I typically, although I'm Irish and they always say luck of the Irish, I don't have a lot of luck. But I got real lucky with this panel, right? I want to introduce 4 gentlemen who I just had the pleasure of meeting today. Dave Kennedy, closest to me. Ryan Kazanciyan, James Plouffe, and Andre McGregor. These gentlemen are the technical writers, or the technical subject matter experts, if you will, behind the show of Mr. Robot. So all those cool hacks that we see on TV that are, by the way, 99%, almost 100% authentic, these gentlemen are kind of the sounding board to ensure that they get pulled off correctly. So just briefly, why don't we just go down the road, just say a few things about about yourself, and then we'll get into the panel itself.
Sure. Testing, test.
Oh.
Test. Nothing yet. Oh. Handheld.
Supposed to turn them on? Nope,
Yeah,
I'm on.
number 3 would have been fine.
We did that on purpose.
Are you going to turn on?
Anticipation.
Oh, your mic's
That's right.
Testing. Test.
There
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Hey, it's amazing. I'm Dave Kennedy. I helped a little bit with season 1, and I think you've seen on season 1, episode 5, and season 2, episode 1. They used my tool in this show, which was the Social Engineer Toolkit. So I wrote that, and I'm also author of a number of tools and all that good stuff. So.
Hey, Ryan Kazanciyan, Chief Security Architect for a software company called Tanium. I've been working with Mr. Robot since season 2. Worked on a lot of the hacks from the midpoint of the season onward, kind of culminating in the hack in the final episode where I did some of the firmware reverse engineering stuff that you saw on screen. I've spent half of my career doing attack and penetration, security assessment type work, the other half doing incident response and forensics, investigation type work. So I've kind of been on both sides of the coin, playing offense, playing defense.
I'm going to see if, my lab mic's going. So my name's James Plouffe. I currently work at a company called MobileIron. We do security and management for smartphones and tablets. Before that, I spent a lot of time in enterprise IT and consulting, primarily as a defender.
And I'm Andre McGregor. I work alongside Ryan at Tanium. So I'm our security director and run our internal IT security team. Prior to that, I was an FBI cyber special agent, supervisory special agent out of New York, where I built up a squad that dealt with China, Russia, and Iran hacking, as well as state sponsors of terror, such as ISIS.
So take us back to the beginning. So how did it all start? Did it start with just one of you? Were there multiple? Now it's obviously there's 4 of you that are these technical subject matter experts. Can you shed some light on that? Maybe James, if you want to take that one.
So I actually used to work with Coradana, who is the tech producer on the show. He was an intern of mine way back in the day, and we used to get up to all sorts of mischief with various hacking tools, including Dave's, by the way. And so he and I had kind of a shared distaste for the way that hacking in general is portrayed in popular entertainment, and we had that in common. Fortunately, Core also had that in common with the creator of the show, Sam Esmail. And so when they caught up in LA, they hit it off, and I bumped into Core in LAX, and he asked if he could call with questions, which of course I was totally open to, and that's how it got started for me.
On my end, I met Core, of which then I started to get text messages and phone calls basically saying, hey, so if Elliot is, going to get arrested, what would that process be like? And I didn't really know much about the show at the time. I was just answering these random questions about arrest procedures, and then we're starting to get into various hacking techniques, and all of a sudden I'm on with the writers' room on a conference call with Sam Esmail, and he's asking me questions, and then finally I realized it became a full-time job doing this, and so I enlisted Ryan Kazanciyan to help me as well, because what you saw in the seasons really, and the accuracy that we've done, took a lot of work, a lot of hours at 3 o'clock in the morning, and text messages at all times of the day.
Yeah, the creative process is pretty interesting, having never been involved in anything like this before. The story arcs are written out, of course, in advance, but a lot of the actual details of the hacking scenes are plugged in later on, and that's where a lot of us came in, where the characters have to get from point A to point B, and there's some dialogue written around it, but it's kind of a blank canvas, and so that's kind of the fun of it, like figuring out what is a hack that is realistic, that reflects the technology available in the time period of the show, which is like mid-2015, and that actually can be both understandable for a general audience, but also give people who want the freeze frame and who are in the security or technology communities some fun stuff to check out and realize, like, oh, hey, that's actually a real tool. That's a real technique. That makes sense in the context. So that's a lot of what we do.
And one of the things you should know if you don't is that most of the on-screen effects when an actor is interacting with a computer are actually practical. So it's fairly common in Hollywood. Actors interact with a green screen, and later someone goes back and animates what happens on that screen. So when Andre and Ryan are telling you that they're up in the middle of the night, what they're helping is putting together the animations that actually make that take place. So when you see Rami Malek at a keyboard, he's actually interacting with that keyboard, and things that are happening on screen are real.
And I have a little bit of different interaction. These folks are more heavily involved than I definitely am. I got contacted during season 1, and I just got a random email into my inbox at the office at Trusted Sec. They're like, hey, there's a new show coming out on USA. We're interested in using your tool as part of it. Do you have any objections or anything like that? And I responded back, and the site has been on a few TV shows before in the past. I think it was on like National Geographic and a few other ones. So when they did those, I was like, okay, yeah, sure, no problem. Here's a disclaimer. I signed a waiver and all that good stuff, and had no idea what it was at the time. And then I started getting involved with Mike Basil, who was I think reports through them at the time, and so they aired it. And it was funny because the attack that they used in season 1, episode 5 was like a really old version of SET. And so they used the SMS spoofing message, and it was basically a social engineering con where they spoofed a text message from somebody going to another person. And so I had actually removed that module about a year ago prior to that. And so I literally had like 500 emails in my inbox like, hey, can you re-add the SMS spoof module because I saw it in Mr. Robot. So I ended up rewriting the whole thing, and now there's an SMS spoofing module back in Mr. Robot, and it works really, and back in SET, and actually works really well, by the way. And then I got contacted a couple other times for doing some skits. So one of the ones was really cool. It didn't end up airing in season 1, but they wanted to make it look like Elliot was hacking the Ashley Madison database to expose some stuff. So I wrote him a skit that actually looked like Elliot was hacking into Ashley Madison and extracting the database and all that good stuff. So it's been kind of fun working on those different ones, especially on season 1, and seeing your tool in season 1 and tool, which is cool.
So I think what's really cool about the show is the authenticity of it, right? And so Dave, this really is going to be for you, and it involves your social engineering toolkit. So I believe as Darlene's preparing her malicious code, real hackers were watching, and they saw something appear on her screen that is very close to you. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what appeared on the screen and what that significance has to you.
Yeah, so it was interesting. So Darlene was basically going in and trying to deploy a crypto wall to the Evil Corp organization and whatnot. And during that period of time, they used a social engineer toolkit. And part of the social engineer toolkit is the ability to create third-party modules. And what third-party modules are, I think of it as like Metasploit framework, for example. Well, the social engineer toolkit is a framework for social engineering. And so it was actually really cool to see because it gave the hacker in their own fantasy, their own kind of eliteness, because they made their own third-party module to deploy, crypto wall to the organization, not using a built-in template that was already inside the social engineer toolkit. So it was really cool to see Darlene actually, build her own module or whatnot and deploy, ransomware basically to the entire organization through a third-party module and leveraging a framework like that. I think it was also funny. I think in season 1, Elliot got mad at Darlene because she basically downloaded, I think, a piece of malware off of Rapid9. What was it? So I mean, those types of things are really neat because they really portray real-life simulations that we do every single day as hackers, and that's the cool part about it. I think that's why we adopted it kind of in the hacking community.
The only thing cooler than that is I actually designed that module for season 2, episode 1.
Did you really?
And I get to meet the guy. I haven't met Dave Kennedy until right now.
I love
So
it.
yes, yours was cool, but mine is cooler because I get to actually, meet you having done that and showing that on television. So what you saw was what I designed. So awesome.
So when the writers give you an outline, how much direction do they give you in developing a hack? And can you give an example of something that you really helped with that?
So I'll actually pick one that was a very small scene, but one that I think reflects on the way the show cares about getting it right. So midway through season 2, there's a quick scene where you see Trenton and Mobley meet for the first time in a coffee shop. And Trenton hacks Mobley's Android phone with stage fright exploit. So the basic gist of the scene was to have that hack happen, but the details of how were kind of up in the air. And initially they were going to use this Bluetooth exploit idea that didn't really make technical sense for what they wanted to happen. And so I worked with Core, and they changed the script and changed the scenario. So the dialogue in the scene changed to reflect what I suggested would be a more technically realistic alternative, which was her basically saying, they're arguing about what's better, iPhone or Android. And she lures him to this benchmarking website, which we mocked up to look like the Google Octane browser benchmark site. So they load it up on their browsers, and that site has an embedded MP4 file that she's generated with the stage fright exploit. So it was almost like a watering hole type attack. And that's what you ended up seeing on screen, and that was a pretty far departure from what was initially written out in the script. And it's something that comes by in like less than 30 seconds of screen time, but they wanted to get it right. And that same level of attention and detail, I think, applied to every hack you saw, big and small.
So this one's for Andre. So Andre, your background is you're in the FBI. So in addition to being a technical subject matter expert on the show, I also believe that they've also tagged you for some other areas as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so spoiler alert for season 2, if you haven't seen it, the FBI is involved in the hack, of course. So really sort of my participation started because you have a major hack that's going to happen against the world, really, and the FBI is going to be the lead agency. And so having to consult, review every line to make sure it's accurate, and then I got the awesome opportunity for episode 9, season 2, to actually choreograph the SWAT scene, where SWAT agents were going in, and Dom, the main character, actually finds a piece of evidence there. And it was awesome because I've never choreographed a scene before. And I'm talking to SWAT guys afterwards, and I'm telling them what to do, and then I ask them what they do, and they're like, oh, we're NYPD Emergency Service Unit. I'm like, oh, so you're SWAT guys. Like, just do your job. And they're like, oh, really? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, we normally don't say anything because some directors just they want us to run, or they want us to do things that we don't do, and we want to get called back. So we don't actually try to change it. But we love working Mr. Robot because you guys want to get this accurate, and so we even got it accurate to how we broke in doors. And then at the end, if you saw the link analysis chart, which I won't reveal too much about, I spent 3 hours designing that to basically show how the FBI would take subjects, facilities, and other pieces of case information and put that all together to then show it to Darlene to hopefully flip her and turn her into a source. So very, very awesome way of using my FBI knowledge for good.
The hardest part about moderating this panel is selecting the right questions. I have about 100 of them, so I'm trying to go through the right ones here. So as technical advisors, your job is to make Mr. Robot better. Are there any ways in which your role with Mr. Robot has made you better at your day job? Who wants to tackle this one?
Well,
James?
it's certainly made me more paranoid. And so I think it's one of those things, it's easy anytime you're dealing with technology to sort of take shortcuts to just get something working as opposed to getting something working right. And those are two different things a lot of the time. And so I think, if anything, Mr. Robot has reinforced that cybersecurity is going to be increasingly important because we're so heavily dependent on technology at this point. So I don't know that it's radically transformed the way that I think about things, but it really makes me double click a little bit more.
I'd say, as security practitioners, we tend to design security for everybody without explaining why we're doing it, right? I mean, a lot of times we say, don't click this, don't go here, don't download, don't put a USB drive in. but we failed to explain the reasons why. And I think Mr. Robot is that reason why for the mainstream audience. I mean, you're able to kind of point to various scenes and various episodes of the show, whether it's someone at the level of my mother's education in computers, which she just got an iPhone a year ago, all the way to people in this room to say, this is why we're doing it. And now I can bring that to my company and explain further as to why we have our defense in-depth security practices, and it helped me to understand that I need to be more transparent in how we do security.
I think for me, looking at it, I mean, I've definitely produced more code because of Mr. Robot. So I've released new versions because I actually had a whole version dedicated to Mr. Robot. So I know I've cranked out at least 10,000 lines of code for Mr. Robot based on the motivation. But one thing I like about it is I think it's really the first show that I've ever seen that is technically accurate. If you look at a lot of the ones like CSI Cyber, or you look at NCIS, where they're like, hey, we can hack faster if we both type on the same keyboard, and we can bypass this firewall, I think it's a great awareness for people that aren't necessarily in our field to say, is this actually possible? And you have the bearings behind it because you have great folks here, that are behind it, that are experts in these areas, doing these types of things on a regular basis to say, yes, it is technically accurate and it is possible. And I think a good example was like season 1. Elliot didn't know how to get access to the prison to release the one guy or whatever, and so he had to research how to get access to it. And then he found that there was a vulnerability in one of the police cars, and he could use that to bridge back and get access in. That's the same type of steps that we would do as attackers. It's that hacker mindset of we don't know what we're going into, but we have enough understanding of technology to figure out, to research, to find that hole or that vulnerability, to go and actively exploit it. So I think what it's done is created a lot of awareness for technology that we didn't have, and the risks and exposures that we have, because technology moves so fast. I think it's a really great thing for everybody to understand.
All right, a few more questions from me, and then I'll turn it over to the audience. So I have to know, and this is major spoiler alert for those of you who are not finished season 2. Take down a building. I'd love to know who came up with that hack, and did you collaborate with each other on that?
So actually, that was when season 2 started out. That was the first question from the writers' room to me. So I got the call that we all get, which is, hey, you're on speaker with the writers' room. Listen, what we need to do is blow up a building. And I was actually shopping for a mattress at the time, which is a weird time to get that call. But I was like, okay. And they're like, and we need it to involve hacking somehow. And I said, okay, I'm going to have to call you back. And they're like, you don't just know how to blow up a building? I'm like, I don't actually have that one in my back pocket. No. And so it took a little bit of scheming and arguing, because it's kind of going to Dave's point about how do you even approach this problem. And it started out with, well, what's even there that could be combustible? And so based on some work that I'd done in data center builds, I remember a safety guy having freaked out all the time about the ventilation in the battery room, and I didn't understand for a long, long time until I sat down with him. I was like, Brad, listen, dude, you're really wrapped around the axle about these fans working. Why does that matter to you? And he's like, because this is a huge battery array, and these things are leaking hydrogen a little bit all the time. And so that kind of became the genesis of it, and then you saw that mature, what systems then would need to be targeted to cause a sufficient hydrogen buildup. And you can Google this. It's actually happened in a few places. There's a big one in Sacramento. The pictures are pretty astonishing. So, and then, we got further down the line, and it got down to kind of the stuff that Ryan was involved in, right?
Yeah, and so, midway through the season, while they're getting the actual technical details of what's going to be on screen down, I'm talking with Core, and of course, I hadn't actually met James at this point, but this had already been, the arc had already been set. This was like the finale for the season. And so I had the same reaction as James, which was Core said, well, what type of malware would do this? And there isn't one magic piece of malware that will really do all of this stuff. So I started to break it down, kind of in the same way as when I used to do penetration testing. You break down a problem and figure out what are the discrete steps. And I was like, all right, well, there's going to be a power management device that controls all these enterprise UPS devices. So I started Googling and look at APC, one of the major vendors out there, and find some of the network-connected UPS management devices. And I'm like, well, there's going to be safety overrides that you can't bypass because that would be unsafe. So I'm sure there's an administration interface to these devices, but I'm also sure that interface doesn't let you configure the device to do something that would break or blow things up. So how would you get around that? Well, if the hardware was capable of more than the software permitted, then if you override the software, you could make the hardware do bad things. And so that's a firmware hack. So then I went and found firmware files, and I'm like, well, I wonder if these are differential updates or if you can just go to the website for these UPS companies and just get the full firmware image without being a customer. And yeah, you actually can. So I have a VM. I actually pulled down a real firmware file for a real UPS device, and I started to disassemble it using a few tools that you see on screen, binwalk and R2, which is a reverse engineering framework. And what you saw on screen is, on one shot, there's a binwalk disassembly showing where executable code lives in the firmware. And then on the R2 screenshot, you see basically a patched instruction where a logic sequence in the code has been patched from a jump equals to a jump not equals. And was that actually meaningful code or a meaningful change? No, I just picked this spot of x86 code and changed an instruction to make it look like, you know, a logic route was modified. So for the handful of people that are freeze framing and looking at stuff, they were gonna be like, oh, cool, like that's actually little bits of real world reverse engineering. But from a practical side, the key for me was like Dave was saying, malware doesn't just automatically do all these magic things. People do research, they plan this, it's multi-stage effort. And so capturing a little piece of that in Terrell and Elliot's and Mr. Robot's plan was really my goal there. And it was really fun to see how that end-to-end played out in the episode.
But by the way, the FBI agent in me says don't Google any of that.
Oh,
So actually, to be clear, the things that you can look up are fire response reports about that. Don't Google how to do it. Don't try it at home.
I looked at the screenshots that I had sent the writers after I'd finished mocking this up, and I was like, I need to delete these virtual machines, because if someone looks at this outside of the context of knowing what I'm doing for the show, it really looks kind of suspicious.
Well, and part of the discussion up front, too, actually, was how realistic does this one need to be? And so there was a little back and forth about, do we need to make sure that the volume of hydrogen is enough? And I was like, you know, I don't think we should do that. I think that some information can be left to, you know, the imagination, or just incorrect to make it not plausible for you to do at home.
So for all the students that are in the crowd that will someday be seeking employment in the cybersecurity industry, do you have any words of wisdom for them?
I would say, you know, for me, I've always kind of lived my life by trusting my gut, which is probably the most horrible way of going about what you do. But it's always worked for me. But, you know, taking it in your passion and knowing that things that you're learning are frustrating. It's hard to learn those things, but you can learn whatever you want to. And that's, I think, the cool thing about this field is that if you have enough dedication and persistence and you make this more of a hobby than it is a job, you can go anywhere in this industry. For me, I remember sitting out in 2002 trying to figure out how ROP gadgets worked, and I couldn't figure out how to get remote code execution, getting around data execution prevention. And it took me 3 months of trying to figure out, because there was no documents at the time. ROP hadn't been invented at the time. And so I was trying to figure out all these different things. And I sat on my couch for like 3 months trying to figure this out, because I was so frustrated with things. But once I got it, I understood it, and I understood it better than anybody. And then I went from there, and I built on that, and I built on that until I was able to do what we do today. So you don't get there day one, but having that persistence and that ability to learn and go through those frustration steps are healthy. So that's my recommendation: is learn.
One quick thing I'd pass along is the security field in general is evolving so fast. There are dozens and dozens of specializations you can go down. And I think, like Dave said, picking something that you love or you're interested in that can be a hobby for you, not a job or not a requirement academically, is the best way to really get yourself embedded in that world and educated. At the same time, I came to find that having the fundamentals mattered a lot. Like dating myself a bit here, but there were no specialization degrees when I graduated. I was computer science because that's all I had as an option. And at the time, I was frustrated because I just wanted to do hacking and computer security stuff, and I had to learn all this like comp sci stuff that I thought was really abstract and boring. And as it turns out, like that's a really solid foundation for you to pick whatever specializations you want to go into down the line. And so don't underestimate, I think, the value of that. It really makes you flexible and adaptable to learning lots of new things as your career evolves in the future.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that sentiment about the fundamentals. Get the fundamentals down, because everything after that is just syntax.
Yeah.
And syntax is easy. But the fundamentals are actually, it turns out, a little tougher. But they make everything else so much easier. The other thing I would encourage you to do is, if you're interested in a field in cyber, or in a position in the field of cybersecurity, you could use Dave's tool to pen test with your own resume. Don't do that.
I would say serve your country. Now, what I mean by that is, and you're talking to a guy that, did many years in the FBI and now at Silicon Valley in a startup, but, it's very easy to sort of look and say, hey, I'm going to graduate and, I can go work at a startup and try to do some cool stuff there, but there's some really cool stuff that's happening inside the government, whether you're, at the NSA, CIA, FBI level, or you're.
That's where I came from. So.
Or you enlist or become an officer in one of the branches, or quite frankly, you just create user group that can be leveraged in areas where we have a deficiency in how the government is responding to how we deal with cyber defense. Like these are things that I want to just make sure that we don't all decide to run to Silicon Valley and try to be the next Instagram guys, and we forget to cure cancer, right? Like we need to take that same knowledge that you guys have in this room and bring it to good use and realize that, yes, you're young, but you have a lot of time to go off and make lots of money. Like just start with the framework of everyone talking here and saying, how do I make society better now in the next couple of years? And you can do that when you graduate and go into the government or help the government in some sort of way, because there's a lot of people that do not look like the people in this room at the ages in this room working in government and IT that don't get it. They don't. And we need to get these people in the room to better the technology and the innovation for the mainstream users, not the DARPA people, but the mainstream users of tech in government.
That's great, thank you. So in addition to moderating an awesome panel, we also have great gifts. So students who would like to ask a question or ask questions, we do have some prizes for you that you'll walk away with. So why don't we open it up to the floor? Students in the audience with questions. See one back here.
Oh.
So if I understand your question, it's kind of hard to hear. I apologize, the mic wasn't going on. But we said when you first launched SET, it says, I'd like to thank everybody that helped with that, right? And what goes into that type of thing? So, like SET was interesting because I started it just for fun. If anybody's familiar with Chris Hanegi, he runs socialengineer.com, and him and I were like in an IRC chat room. And we're talking about how like social engineering is gonna be like the next big thing. I guess it's like the old thing that's coming new again or whatever. But and so we wanted to do something, and so that's when we came out with the podcast, and I started writing the Social Engineer Toolkit. And over the years, it's gained in popularity, and other folks have definitely contributed to the tool, making it better. Everything from the original SMS spoofing module that was in there was a third-party contributor to other tools. So, for me going along, I find that I learn so well off of others and what other folks do, and the contributions have always been amazing to go through as well. So, whenever you can get community support or collaboration, I'm a big advocate of open source. I think I maintain about 17 to 20 different open source projects that I actively contribute to that are mine. But getting that contributions from the community has been absolutely astonishing, and that's the reason why SET has been able to grow the way it has, is because of the people.
So I'm going to up the ante a little bit and say if anyone asks a really cool question, I have my own Mr. Robot sweatshirt here, and I will make sure I get it signed by whoever you want on the show. Signed, if you ask a really cool question. If you don't, then...
Can I ask a question?
I did want to give away my FBI Cyber Raid jacket, but I think the FBI probably would not be very happy with me giving it away.
Can you give away government property? Is that?
This was combat lost, so they don't
Appreciate it.
They don't actually know that this is gone anymore. Kidding.
I think we have a question right here. Red shirt, yes.
So I'm a big fan of the show, and my question is, what's your favorite... Hello? Okay. What is your favorite part about working with Rami Malek, and are the characters familiar with the tech behind the hacks like before they film, or do you guys fill that in? Because I know like you mentioned that that you go back and do like all the behind the scenes like detail work like after it's filmed.
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot more time offset than we do on. I think, I'm not sure if you had a chance to, Jay. Andre and I visited SET a couple times over the...
So, I mean, another spoiler, I guess, is, I hate to say it, but we use Flash animation for what you see.
Yeah.
So Flash will never die. Like,
but it's
Twinkies and cockroaches, the apocalypse, Flash will exist even after the apocalypse.
But it's gotten them all interested in, like, in their own way, they've all found this stuff interesting, and they've attended some security conferences and like each done their own kind of like research about it. So that's really been cool because it like awakened them to a whole like world out there that they otherwise wouldn't have known existed. I will say this, having watched them on SET, it gave me an appreciation for one, how hard the job is. Like, acting in a show like that, it's a lot of repetition, it's long hours, it's tough work, it's as tough as any other job. And they bring a pretty serious intensity to it that I thought was really cool to see. I mean, they're in the zone the same way, like in my own weird parallel, I'm in the zone when I'm sitting at my computer and forgetting to eat or go to the bathroom or drink for 12 hours straight.
See, I think that's unfair because James, you're actually on the show.
Well,
and
no,
Andre
right.
actually is on the show.
Yes.
So I was not actually on the show, but for astute observers, you'll notice there's a sort of dithering kind of E-Corp exec in the season 1 finale who has my name. That is not by accident. And if you remember how the season 1, how that character went out in the season 1 finale, the moral of that story is be nice to your interns because they might work in Hollywood one day. But to follow up on your question a little bit in terms of the actors' engagement, so that's actually one of Core's responsibilities on set, is to help coach them through exactly what's taking place. So as Ryan pointed out, they may not totally understand exactly what's going on, but they do definitely get a fairly detailed briefing about what is going to happen. So
I had the opportunity of talking to Rami and Christian Slater for CNN one time, and it was interesting because the way they introduced it is like, hey, you're gonna get to talk to a real hacker, and they're like, oh, we get to talk to you guys all the time, we love you, and they're super, they love our industry, they love everything that's about us, and I think their questions were more framed around like what drives us and why do we do what we do, because they like to understand that for who they're playing. I mean, they literally immerse themselves into being them, even though they may not understand the technical details of everything that they do. So I think when I was talking with them, they were more interested in like why I'm driven to be a hacker versus that curiosity piece. Understanding that I think was key to them versus anything. It was pretty cool to talk to them. They're definitely nervous about hackers, I'll tell you that.
I will say on the other end, you have an entire part of the FBI that's now investigating this. So I got to work with Grace Gummer, who's Meryl Streep's daughter, and she plays Dom as the lead FBI agent. And she was very interested in how to act as an FBI agent, and then watching her interview on set, and then she'd come out and say, well, did I do that right? Or, how should I be standing, or where should I be sitting? And really want, like Ryan said, they're very focused on getting it right, and then they have to do it 10 or 15 times because there's many camera angles that they're doing. And so if you watch a TV show and you see many camera angles, that's the actor having done it 5 or 6 times and getting it right and getting the script right and being perfect to get that going. And so being part of that and watching them care so much about the accuracy. So it's not just Sam and Core and Kyle and some of the other people on the production side, it's the actual actors as well.
Coast Guard in the back.
Oh, you have to have a booming voice. You're Coast Guard. You yell on a mic over a boat. On a boat, like, come on.
I have a question regarding educating future cyber professionals. So I want to pursue a career in cyber.
As an FBI agent.
Or the NSA.
So, but I'm currently getting my degree in electrical engineering. Do you think there's more merit when you're working towards a cyber job, going to a college that offers cybersecurity as a direct education, or perhaps getting your degree in some other tangential field to get some kind of outside knowledge and then working towards cyber future?
That's an awesome question. I mean, I've interviewed my current job and my last job dozens of people for consulting and then security software type roles, and I've always found that I've interviewed people who went and got a specialization degree in cybersecurity and they were rock stars, but I've also found that people that didn't go into a specialization degree but did a hard science like engineering, computer science, they also just had a mindset and a background that could be adapted to learning a problem space really quickly, meaning...
Back to your point of foundation.
Exactly, foundation. You go into that role, a new job, you spend a few weeks shadowing someone, your mind already knows how to attack problems in a certain way that can just be, like you said, it's syntax. It's just a superficial layer on top of a thought process and a way of thinking that you've already got.
I mean, you look at guys like Joe Grand, for example, who one of the top hardware hackers that I've ever met in my life. He didn't start off as a hardware hacker. He started off as an engineer and went from there. Matthew Graber, a great example of that as well. I know he worked for one of the agencies for a while in home net skills there, but comp sci major, right? I think.
No, he did linguistics work for the Navy.
Did he really?
Yeah, he did linguistics work for the Navy and had no computer or no real computer forensics background. And
having that foundation and the skills, I mean, is everything when it comes to this industry.
And I will say I've worked with some really smart electrical engineers in some classified facilities doing some amazing work that, as long as you have deep analytical reasoning, you'll go far. Really. I mean, you could specialize in cybersecurity, but it's not necessary. You'll learn that stuff. I mean, if you can just understand the fundamentals, as everyone talks about, everything else you can learn.
See, I never had any formal. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the great thing is, like, the tools are out there to play with now. So you can get your own education the way a lot of us have. Like, I'm the same as Ryan. When I went to school, there wasn't a cybersecurity specialization. It was just sort of, comp sci, good luck to you. And so, like, get out the box of Legos, dump it all over the floor, see what you can make.
I never actually had a formal college degree, or I didn't go comp sci. Instead, when I was a kid, I homed in on like tearing apart things, like tearing apart my Teddy Ruxpin to figure out how it worked. And there was these games called MUDs, multi-user dimensions, and most of you are probably way too young to even remember what those are. But before we had graphics, right? I don't mean to sound like an old guy here, but before we had graphics, we had MUDs that were all text-based games. And that's how I learned how to code C. I ran my own MUD and I did my own mods to it. I wrote my own code, and all that good stuff as a kid. And then by the time I got into the Marines, I went into Intel, got a clearance and all that good stuff. They homed in on those skills, and then I became more on the offensive side and doing more exploitation dev and, exploit dev and figuring out different attacks that way. So, I had a little bit of a different foundation, but I went to school afterwards for comp sci and went from there.
One more question with the Dory hat in the back.
So one of the things I really liked about Mr. Robot was the focus on kind of hiding stuff into the show. So for instance, the IRC channel that they use, if you go on Freenode, there's people in that IRC channel that talk about the show. And it seems that the show actively promotes that. For instance, when they do the camera sweep around the room, asking, do you see what's different? So what's kind of the inspiration for putting that stuff in the show? A lot of shows seem to have Easter eggs kind of hidden, but Mr. Robot kind of pushes those into the limelight sometimes.
Sure. So Core, who we work for, is really the master of that entire arc of Easter eggs and the backstory and the other world behind them. And so he has this, like, I forget what he calls it. It's like an almanac or something. It's basically the end-to-end idea of where everything's going to connect and lead. And so
Oh, the Bible.
Oh yeah, that's right. His Bible of Easter eggs. And so it's pretty cool how much time and energy they put into it, and it's mostly him. And I think part of what's motivating for that, and not to speak for him, but seeing the engagement online by people that like look at every IP address or every email address that they see on screen and try it out and find that there's something there and that it tells a little bit of the story that you wouldn't have seen on screen. They did a little bit of that in season 1. Season 2, they have a lot more. It's tough for them because it's like a whole other job practically, but there's going to be a lot more of that. I think you can expect to see some cool continuations of some of the stuff that you saw this year.
I always did find it amazing how people take screenshots and find a missing semicolon or missing space.
Yep. That's my biggest fear, by the way. Like going on Reddit and seeing that I had a syntax error in something that I gave. Right. Like, oh my god.
But like it did start early on. I mean, Sam doesn't use fake telephone numbers or IP addresses if he can avoid it. I mean, there's a lot of legal issues that go along with that. Lawyers sort of get in the middle of a lot of things. But any lawyers in the room, apologize. But to get real IP addresses and real phone numbers and to be able to use those so that when somebody inevitably screenshots it and then looks and finds something, it actually goes somewhere. It takes a lot of work. So a lot of credit to Core to putting that together.
I think that's the strong point of the show is that immersion into reality, right? I mean, like when they did the crypto wall scene in season 1, the screens got replaced with the Jester logo, and kind of insinuating that maybe Darlene was the Jester or the group was the Jester or whatnot, or even just the immersion into the FBI side where you have like Lauren Siegel she's a CNN reporter and she's literally on doing fake CNN reports on the show themselves, and you have them mentioning Kami and all these other things. I mean, you really feel like it's happening. You feel like you're inside of a Great Depression that's hit the world because people can't make all these payments and stuff and what's really possible. So I think that's the cool part about the show on top of the hacking. That's
awesome. So on behalf of Comcast, University of Connecticut, all of our sponsors, a big round of applause for these guys for being here today. If you asked a question, come see me at the side of the stage. I have a prize for you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.